She gave her first time to a Mafia king, and she never expected what would happen next. But the real shock was not the night he touched her. It was the moment she realized the man who shattered her heart was the one who led her straight into the arms of someone far more dangerous. Imagine finding out in one brutal instant that the future you protected was built on a lie. A hotel hallway, shaking hands, a locked breath, a boyfriend behind one door, betrayal behind the next, and a city waiting outside like it already knows your life is about to split in two. This is not just a love story. It is a story about heartbreak, power, obsession, and the moment a woman must choose whether love will cage her or awaken her. Stay with me until the end, and if this story pulls you in like the video, and tell me where you're watching from. So when the elevator doors slid shut behind Ava Bennett, there was already no clean way back to the girl who had stood outside Suite 1408, with her heart still trying to believe in Ethan Cole. The elevator moved in silence, smooth as water, carrying her upward through the dark glass spine of the tower. Chicago burned below them in ribbons of gold and red headlights flowing over wet streets. Neon caught in puddles, the river cutting a black line through the city. Ava stood very still, her fingers curled around the strap of her bag, her pulse still uneven from the sight of Ethan shirtless in that hotel doorway, his mouth already shaping excuses she had not stayed to hear. Beside her, Roman Moretti said nothing. That was the first thing that unsettled her. Most men filled silence because they were afraid of it. Roman seemed to own it. He stood in a black button-down with the top two buttons open, one hand in his pocket, the other hanging loose at his side, as though the entire city had adjusted itself to his pace years ago. He did not look at her directly, not yet. The reflection in the steel doors showed enough. The sharp line of his jaw, the stillness in his shoulders, the kind of control that did not need to announce itself. Ava hated the way her body noticed him. She had just watched her relationship rot in front of her eyes, and still she could feel the quiet heat of his presence, the dangerous steadiness of it. It made her feel disloyal to her own pain. The elevator opened straight into a private foyer lined in dark stone and low amber light. Beyond it, Roman's penthouse stretched out in glass and shadow, all clean lines and expensive restraint. The city flooded every window. The river shimmered below like a blade. Ava slowed at the threshold. It was not just luxury. It was precision. Nothing was accidental. The books arranged by spine and subject. The sculptural lamp cut from blackened brass. The single painting above the fireplace abstract and violent in deep reds and charcoal. Even the air felt curated, touched with cedar smoke and something colder beneath it. Roman set his phone down on a marble console and shrugged off his jacket. "You can leave your bag there," he said. His voice was low, rough, at the edges, the kind of voice that sounded intimate even when it was giving directions. Ava slipped her bag from her shoulder but kept one hand on it, Roman noticed. His mouth shifted, not quite a smile. "I'm not taking anything from you tonight, Ava." That should have comforted her. Instead, it sent a thin shiver through her. He had said her name like he had a right to it, but without forcing anything. He crossed to the bar, poured amber liquid into 2 glasses, and held one out to her. "This one won't burn as much." She took it carefully. Their fingers touched for half a second. His hand was warm. Hers was cold. She moved to the windows, partly for the view, partly because she needed distance. From here, the city looked unreal, too far away to hurt anyone. Cars the size of sparks, buildings like polished teeth. Somewhere down there was her dorm room with its chipped desk and overstuffed bookshelf and thrift store rug. Somewhere down there, Ethan was probably already rewriting what happened in his head, turning betrayal into confusion, confusion into an accident into something forgivable. The thought made her throat tighten. Roman gave her time. When he spoke again, he did it from a few feet away, not crowding her. "You don't have to talk." Ava stared out at the river. "I know." He waited. "That almost makes me want to." A quiet sound came from him, almost amusement, but gentler. "Then talk." She took a sip. He had been right. This one was smoother. For a moment, she said nothing. Then it all came out in strange pieces, not like a confession, more like glass shaken from a broken frame. She told him she was 22, a senior at Lakeview University, sociology major, Finals in 2 weeks. She told him she had been with Ethan a year, that she had not slept with him not because she was afraid, not because she was naive, but because she had wanted it to mean something. She had wanted to choose that moment when her heart felt safe enough to open the last locked door. Roman did not interrupt. She laughed once, but there was no humor in it. Stupid, right? Roman's eyes stayed on her face. Number. Ava let out a breath that shook in the middle. I thought tonight was going to be that night. The room seemed to tighten around the words. For the first time since they had left the bar, Roman moved closer. Not enough to touch her, just enough that she could feel the shift in the air. Then the wrong man almost got something he never deserved. Ava looked at him. No pity. No smugness. No soft, fake sympathy men wore when they sensed vulnerability and wanted to dress themselves in it. He sounded angry for her in a way Ethan never had been angry for anything that did not affect him directly. A hot sting rose in her eyes before she could stop it. She turned away, pressing her lips together. This is humiliating. Roman leaned one shoulder against the edge of the marble island. Humiliation belongs to the person who did the thing, not the person who had to witness it. Ava gave a faint, disbelieving laugh. That sounds good. It's true. She studied him again. There was something severe in his face that might have looked cruel on another man. On him, it looked like discipline forged under pressure. Do you always know what to say? Number. Then why tonight? Roman lifted his glass, took a slow drink, and let the silence sit a moment before answering. Because I know what betrayal looks like on a face. The words landed quietly, but they landed deep. Ava almost asked what had been done to him. She stopped herself. He did not feel like a man who offered the center of himself on the first night. Instead, she asked, "And what makes you think I'm not the kind of girl who goes home with strangers all the time?" One dark brow lifted. Do you? Number. Then why pretend you might? Ava looked down into her glass. Because pretending felt better than admitting how lost she was. Roman seemed to understand that too. He set his drink aside and crossed to a hallway at the far end of the living room. When he returned, he carried a folded charcoal t-shirt and a pair of black lounge pants, both clearly men's, both expensive in the quiet way of things that were made to last. There's a guest suite down the hall on the left, he said. Bathroom is through the second door. You can shower. Sleep. Leave whenever you want in the morning. Ava stared at the clothes in his hands. That's it? Roman's gaze held hers. What were you expecting? She hated how quickly color rose to her face. I don't know. I do. The words were not mocking. They were worse. They were accurate. He stepped forward and placed the clothes on the back of a chair near her. Close enough to offer them. Not close enough to force her to take them. Then he did something that almost undid her. He gave her space. No move toward the hallway. No hand at her waist. No attempt to turn shock into opportunity. He simply looked at her the way a man might look at a skittish animal deciding whether the room was safe enough to stay in. If you change your mind, he said, my driver will take you home. Ava nodded, then realized she did not know what home meant tonight. Her dorm room suddenly felt impossibly small, too full of the version of herself that had spent a year believing Ethan was patient because he respected her. She could already see the fluorescent hallway lights, hear girls laughing down the corridor, imagine closing the door and finally having no one to perform strength for. The thought of breaking alone made her chest hurt. So she took the clothes. The guest suite was almost larger than her dorm room. Pale sheets, soft gray walls, a lamp glowing low near the bed. The bathroom gleamed in black tile and brushed steel towels folded with hotel precision. Ava locked the door behind her anyway. In the mirror, she barely recognized herself. Her eyes were swollen. Her hair, chestnut and usually neat, had come loose in damp waves around her shoulders. Her white top still smelled faintly of the perfume in Ethan's hotel room, sweet and expensive and nauseating. She pulled it off so fast her hands trembled. The shower hit her skin in hot sheets. She braced one palm against the tile and let the water pour over the place where the night had split open. For a minute she stood there trying not to think. Then thinking became impossible not to do. Ethan's face when the door opened. The blonde on the bed. Roman's voice at the bar saying, "You're not broken. Not yet." She shut her eyes hard. When she stepped out, she put on Roman's shirt instead of the one he had left for her. It hung past mid-thigh, the fabric crisp against her skin, smelling faintly of him. She did not know why she chose it. Maybe because it was easier to wear a stranger's clean scent than her own ruined evening. She intended to sleep. She could not. After half an hour of lying in the dark, listening to the muted hum of the city and the far-off rhythm of her own thoughts, she slipped out of bed and padded back toward the living room barefoot. Roman was there, not in bed, not gone. Seated alone on the long sofa near the windows, jacket off collar open, one ankle resting over the opposite knee, a low glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. The lights were dimmer now. The city made a silver ghost of him. Ava stopped in the hallway. His eyes lifted to her at once as if he had known she would come. "You don't sleep easily in strange places," he said. It was not phrased as a question. Ava crossed her arms loosely over herself, suddenly aware of the shirt, of the bare skin beneath it, of the way Roman's gaze registered all of that without lingering disrespectfully. "Number." He set the glass down. "Come here." She hesitated. Roman read that too. "Sit," he said, nodding toward the chair opposite him. "Not closer unless you want to." That should not have mattered as much as it did. The fact that he named the line before stepping over it. Ava moved to the chair and sat tucking one leg beneath her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Roman's gaze flicked to the windows and back to her. "You look like you're deciding whether I'm a bad idea." Ava let out a small breath. "You are a bad idea, probably. And yet I'm here. And yet you stayed." The room held the words between them. Ava folded her hands in her lap so he would not see them shake. "There's something wrong with me," she said quietly. "I should have gone back to campus. I should have called my friend. I should not be in a stranger's apartment in the middle of the night wearing his shirt." Roman did not move. "Nothing is wrong with you." "Then why does this feel insane?" "Because pain makes ordinary choices feel impossible." She looked down. "Do you always make it sound simple?" "Number." "Then stop doing it now." Something shifted in his expression then, a darker tenderness. If tenderness could ever belong to a man like him. Roman leaned forward, forearms braced against his knees. "Fine. Here's the less simple version." His voice dropped. "You were betrayed. You were humiliated. You wanted the night to end somewhere that didn't make you feel small. That is not insanity. That is survival." Ava swallowed. His words pressed against a place inside her she had kept clenched all evening. When he reached out, he did it slowly enough for her to refuse. His fingers brushed a loose strand of damp hair back from her cheek. Barely a touch. Warm, controlled, devastating. Ava forgot to breathe. Roman's hand lingered for half a second at her jaw. His eyes stayed on hers. "I'm going to say something," he murmured, "and if it scares you, you go back to bed and lock the door." Her pulse kicked once hard. She nodded. "I don't like the thought of you crying over a man who was never worth your tears." Ava's throat tightened. "There are worse things you could have said." "I know." The honesty of that made the room warmer and more dangerous at the same time. She wanted him to touch her again. The realization came so suddenly it felt almost shameful. Not because she wanted Roman specifically, not yet, but because she wanted the ache inside her replaced by any sensation strong enough to drown it. He seemed to read that too. Roman drew his hand back. "Not tonight," he said. Ava blinked. "What?" "If you let me near you right now, you won't know whether it's me you want or the pain you want to escape." Heat climbed slowly into her face. "And you care about that?" Roman's mouth shifted. "I care about knowing the difference." That answer followed her back to the guest room and into the thin edge of sleep she finally found some time before dawn. She woke to the smell of coffee. For a few seconds, she forgot where she was. The sheets were too soft. The room too quiet. Then the city light came through the curtains, pale and silver, and memory dropped back into place with the weight of a second body. She sat up, heart thudding, and listened. The apartment beyond the door was calm, not empty, calm. When she stepped into the living area, Roman stood at the stove in a charcoal robe, sleeves pushed back, moving with unhurried precision over a skillet. Morning light sharpened the planes of his face. There was something almost absurd about it. This man who looked like he belonged in a boardroom or at the head of a table where men lost millions with one wrong word was making breakfast in bare feet. He glanced up as if her presence had tugged something invisible. "There you are." Ava had no idea why that simple sentence made her chest pull tight. "I didn't mean to sleep this late. It's 8. That's late for me." Roman plated soft scrambled eggs, roasted tomatoes, sliced avocado, and toast with a care that belonged in another man entirely. He set the plate in front of one of the stools at the island. "Sit." Ava did. Coffee appeared in front of her, dark and fragrant. Then orange juice. Then Roman slid onto the stool opposite her with his own plate. She looked at the food, then at him. You cook. I eat. That's not the same thing. It is if you dislike other people in your kitchen. The corner of Ava's mouth lifted before she could stop it. Roman noticed. He noticed everything. There, he said quietly. Better. She looked down at her coffee to hide the blush she did not understand. Breakfast should have felt awkward. It did not. Roman did not push for confession or ask for gratitude. He asked what year she was in, what her thesis track was, whether she liked Chicago before winter ruined it, whether she had always wanted sociology. Ava told him she liked systems power, the way people said one thing in public and lived by something else in private. She told him she liked asking why women were taught to fear desire, but men were taught to expect it. She told him she had built her schedule carefully because scholarships did not leave room for mistakes. Roman listened with the kind of still focus that made most people say more than they intended. When she finally took a bite of the eggs, her eyes widened. He saw that too. Good, she nodded once. Annoyingly, a quiet laugh moved through him, low and warm. Roman stood first. By the time Ava had finished the coffee, he had changed into a black suit that fit him like it had learned his body years ago. He checked the time on his watch and crossed toward her with something small in his hand. Ava. She slid off the stool. He opened a velvet box. Inside, nestled in black silk, lay a slim platinum bracelet. Minimal, elegant, not showy. The kind of piece a girl could wear every day without anyone guessing what it cost. Ava looked up. I can't take that. Yes, you can. It's too much. Roman stepped closer. It's not a gift in the way you mean. He lifted the bracelet from the box and let the silver catch the morning light. It links to my private security network. Ava stared at him, not fully understanding. His gaze never wavered. If anything happens to you, I'll know where you are. The warmth of breakfast vanished. You're tracking me. I'm making sure no one gets near you again. Ava let the words sit between them. In another voice from another man, they would have been instantly unforgivable. Coming from Roman, delivered with that absolute calm, they landed inside some complicated place between alarm and a pulse of dark, irrational safety. I barely know you. Roman looked at the bracelet, then back at her. I know enough. That's not an answer. It's the one I'm giving you. There it was. The first hard edge she had not imagined. He was not asking for permission. He was placing certainty in front of her and waiting to see whether she stepped away from it. Ava should have. Instead, she held out her wrist. She hated herself a little for that. Roman's fingers closed lightly around her hand. The clasp clicked into place with quiet precision. His thumb brushed the inside of her wrist once over the fluttering pulse there. Better, he said. Ava looked down at the bracelet. It was beautiful. That almost made it worse. Roman reached for his keys. My driver can take you to campus. I can get there myself. I know. Then why do you keep saying things like they're already decided? His eyes settled on hers, cool and unreadable now. Because in my world, if I care about something, I make sure it gets where it needs to go. Ava opened her mouth, then closed it again. There was no use pretending she did not hear the shape beneath the sentence. Not someone. Something. The ride to campus took 20 minutes. Rain glazed the streets. Lakeview's stone buildings rose gray and familiar against a low sky. Students moved in clusters under umbrellas, coffee in hand, backpacks slung over shoulders, every life ordinary in the way hers no longer felt. Roman's SUV stopped at the curb. She reached for the handle. Ava. She turned back. Roman looked at her with a focus so direct it made the inside of her ribs feel unsteady. If he comes near you again, you call me. She knew immediately he meant Ethan. That's not your problem. Roman's jaw shifted once. It is if it involves you. Then she was outside the car door, shut the bracelet cool against her skin. By noon, she was sitting in the campus cafe across from Sophie Lane, who had known her long enough to spot trouble before Ava admitted it aloud. Sophie took one look at her face and said, Okay. Start from the part you skipped over in your text. Ava wrapped both hands around a paper coffee cup. The room buzzed around them with laptop clicks and low conversation, but Sophie's sharp blue eyes stayed fixed on her. It's a long story. I have class in 40 minutes and no morals. Go. So Ava told her. Not all of it. Not the way Roman's apartment felt after midnight, or how his shirt had smelled, or the exact note in his voice when he said, not tonight. But enough. Ethan, the hotel, the bar, Roman. Sophie went very still at that last name. Roman Moretti. Ava frowned. You know him? Sophie let out one disbelieving breath. Ava, everyone in Chicago knows him. He's in real estate. Sophie gave her a look. He's in a lot of things. She unlocked her phone, typed quickly, and spun the screen around. Roman's face filled it from a charity gala photograph. Dark suit, white shirt, no tie. One hand in his pocket, expression unreadable as cameras flashed around him. Below the image, a headline read, Moretti Air continues downtown expansion amid quiet buyouts. Sophie swiped again. Roman beside the mayor. Roman at a fundraiser. Roman leaving a courthouse flanked by attorneys. Roman at the opening of a private club rumored to be impossible to enter without the right last name or a debt that mattered. There are stories about his family, Sophie said, lowering her voice. Old Chicago stories, the kind that never make it into official biographies. Ava looked down at the bracelet on her wrist. It's not like that. Sophie followed her gaze. What is that? Nothing. Ava, it's a bracelet. Sophie leaned across the table and caught her wrist gently. The moment her fingers touched the metal, her expression changed. This is not nothing. Ava pulled back a little too fast. He gave it to me. Why? The truth sounded worse spoken aloud, but Ava said it anyway. It tracks where I am. Sophie blinked, then once more slower. He what? It's linked to his security network. Ava, that is not security. That is surveillance with better packaging. A flush crawled up Ava's neck. I know how it sounds. Do you? Ava stared down into her coffee. Part of her did. The clear part. The part that studied systems and power and knew exactly what control looked like when it came dressed in care. But there was another part of her, bruised and raw from last night, that could not stop replaying the feeling of Roman seeing her at her worst and never once making her smaller for it. Sophie exhaled. Tell me you're done with him. Ava did not answer. Sophie's silence sharpened. Oh my God, you are not done with him. Before Ava could respond, a shadow fell across the table. Ethan. He looked wrung out, like he had not slept. His hair was a mess. His jaw carried a dark line of stubble she knew was not deliberate. He had the nerve to look hurt. Ava, please. Just listen to me for 5 minutes. Sophie leaned back in her chair, expression going flat. She doesn't owe you 5 seconds. Ethan ignored her. He looked only at Ava. I screwed up. I know I did. I was drunk and stupid and it meant nothing. Ava felt something in her chest go cold. Nothing. That's not what I mean. No, it is. You just think saying that makes it easier. Ava, come on. One mistake. One mistake doesn't usually involve a hotel suite. Students were starting to glance over. Sophie looked like she was 3 seconds from throwing her iced coffee in his face herself. Ethan reached for Ava's hand. She pulled it back before he could touch her. Then the black Escalade rolled silently to the curb outside the cafe windows. A change moved through the room almost before anyone understood why. Heads turned. The door opened. Roman stepped inside. He wore another dark suit, no coat despite the rain, the city damp still clinging faintly to his shoulders. He did not hurry. He did not need to. Space opened for him anyway. Ethan looked over, irritated first, then wary. Roman crossed the room with the quiet confidence of a man who had never once doubted the effect of his own presence. His gaze went from Ethan to Ava and back again. Is he bothering you? Ava had no idea what answer she meant to give. Ethan puffed up instantly. Who the hell are you? Roman turned his head slowly and regarded him with cool detachment. The man telling you this is the last time you walk toward her like you have a right. The room went still. Ethan laughed, but there was strain under it. You don't know anything about us? Roman's eyes did not blink. I know enough. Ethan took a step forward. Sophie muttered something under her breath that sounded like a prayer or a curse. Ava rose halfway from her seat without realizing it. Ethan, don't. Too late. Ethan shoved Roman in the chest. Roman moved almost lazily. 1 second, Ethan's hand was out. The next, Roman had his wrist twisted down and back just enough to drain all the blood from Ethan's face. No dramatics, no raised voice, just force carefully measured. Another inch, Roman said softly, and I break it. Ethan sucked in a sharp breath. Roman released him with a small push that sent him stumbling back into a chair. Then Roman turned to Ava and held out his hand. You're leaving. The command in it should have angered her. It did. It also made standing there feel impossible. Sophie's eyes found hers across the table. There was warning in them. Fear. Also recognition that the moment had already chosen its own shape. Ava picked up her bag. Roman did not touch her until they were outside where the rain had thinned to mist, and the city smelled like wet concrete and exhaust. Then his hand settled at the center of her back, firm and warm, through her jacket, guiding her toward the SUV. When the door closed behind them, silence flooded the interior. Ava stared out the rain-streaked window for a full block before speaking. How did you know where I was? Roman looked ahead. The bracelet. She laughed once sharply. Right. Roman's jaw flexed. You sounded surprised. I am. That you keep appearing the second my life starts to fall apart. Roman turned the wheel smoothly at the next light. I won't apologize for that. Ava looked down at the silver circling her wrist, beautiful and cold at once. No, she said quietly. I don't think you would. The city passed around them in wet light and blurred reflections. Somewhere between campus and downtown, Ava understood something she had only been circling until then. Roman Moretti did not enter people's lives softly. He stepped into them like he expected the ground to hold. And the dangerous part was not only that he watched or that he intervened or that his protection came wrapped in steel. The dangerous part was how quickly a broken heart could mistake that kind of possession for safety. By the time the SUV pulled beneath the tower and the doorman stepped forward with a lowered head, Ava was no longer only deciding whether Roman was dangerous. She was beginning to understand how easy it might become to stay near the danger once it started to feel like shelter. For Ava, that understanding should have been enough to make her step back. Instead, it drew her deeper. Over the next few days, Roman Moretti began to enter her life with the same quiet certainty he brought into every room. He never asked for space. He simply occupied it until it felt as though it had always belonged to him. It started with small things that should have been easy to refuse and somehow were not. A black town car waiting outside her last class without warning. A text that appeared exactly when her seminar ended. Come downstairs. A cup of coffee already ordered the way she liked it, though she had never told him how she liked it. Ava learned quickly that Roman paid attention the way other men breathed. Effortlessly. Constantly. He noticed what she left unfinished on her plate, what made her look away, what subjects sharpened her voice and which ones made it go quiet. He remembered that she preferred her coffee dark in the morning and lighter by late afternoon. He remembered the name of the professor whose theories she hated and the old sociology book she had spent 3 weeks hunting through used bookstores for. He remembered everything. And after Ethan, after the hotel room, and the sick crack of humiliation inside her chest being remembered, felt dangerously close to being cherished. Roman did not overwhelm her with flowers or grand speeches. He gave her experiences, moments arranged so carefully they felt accidental until she looked closer. One evening after class, he took her to a quiet bookstore tucked between a tailor and an old jazz club in River North. He walked through the narrow aisles with one hand in his pocket, broad shoulders framed by dark wool and winter light, while the elderly owner greeted him by name and with visible respect. Roman never said why. He simply moved through the store as if every door in the city had opened for him often enough that he no longer noticed. Ava wandered toward the social theory shelves, and when she paused at a worn first edition she could never afford, Roman reached past her, took it down, and handed it to her. She looked at the price tucked inside. Absolutely not. Roman glanced at the number, then at her face. That was not a negotiation. Ava held the book against her chest. You do understand that some women find you infuriating. Roman gave her that slight, almost private smile she had begun to dread because it always reached her before she could defend herself. And yet you are still standing here. She hated that he was right. Another night he took her to a private dining room above an old Italian restaurant where the city glowed beyond leaded glass windows and a fire burned low in the corner hearth. He listened while she talked about her thesis ideas about power structures and gender and the invisible bargains women learned to make long before they had words for them. Roman sat across from her, one sleeve rolled back, long fingers curved around a glass of red wine, watching her the way some men watched a storm they wanted to step into. You look at people like you already know what they're hiding, he said. Ava set down her fork. That sounds more flattering than it is. Mostly I just pay attention. So do I. Not in the same way. Roman leaned back in his chair. No, I pay attention because not doing that can get you killed. The words settled between them with surprising weight. Ava's gaze lifted. He had said it calmly, not as a joke, not as a threat, but as a fact that belonged to his bones. Roman, she said carefully, what exactly is it that you do? The corner of his mouth shifted. You've seen the public version. That isn't an answer. It's the one people get. Ava should have let it go. Instead, she held his eyes and said, I'm not people. For one suspended second, something dark and unreadable moved across his face. Then it was gone. No, Roman said quietly. You are not. It was the first time he had spoken to her as though the distinction mattered. After that, the city itself began to feel altered. Not because Chicago changed, but because Ava had started seeing it through Roman's shadow. Corners she had passed 100 times now carried a new texture. The doorman who nodded too quickly. The maitre d' who stood straighter when Roman entered a room. Men in expensive coats who stopped speaking when Roman crossed a lobby. There were no obvious bodyguards at his shoulder, yet someone always seemed to be near. A man by the elevator, a black sedan idling half a block away, a voice in Roman's ear for half a second before he turned away and resumed whatever conversation they had been having. The city seemed to recognize him even when no one said his name. Sophie noticed the change in Ava before Ava admitted it to herself. They were in the student union one gray afternoon, half-eaten sandwiches between them, campus noise rising and falling around the table. Ava had been smiling at something on her phone when Sophie reached across, took the device from her hand, and glanced at the screen. Roman's name. Sophie let out a long breath. You smile differently when it's him. Ava reached for the phone. Sophie pulled it back just out of reach. That is not a good sign. It is just a text. What did he say? Ava hesitated. Sophie narrowed her eyes. Ava, he asked if I had eaten. Sophie blinked once. That is either weirdly sweet or the first page of a true crime documentary. Despite herself, Ava laughed. Sophie did not. I'm serious. You barely know this man. He is older than us by a decade, rich in the kind of way that changes laws around him, and 100% too controlled to be harmless. Ava took her phone back and looked down at the message. Have you eaten? A second one had followed while they were talking. Do not lie. Warmth moved through her before she could stop it. Sophie saw it happen on her face and groaned softly. Oh no, you like the bossy thing. It isn't that simple. It never is. Ava looked down at the silver bracelet around her wrist. She had tried once to take it off. The clasp held fast, smooth, and seamless like a decision made for her. I know it sounds bad, she said quietly. It sounds like a man who thinks care means access. Ava turned the bracelet slowly, watching light catch on the pale metal. Maybe he just thinks the world is dangerous. Sophie's expression softened, but not enough. And maybe that kind of man becomes part of the danger without meaning to. The words stayed with Ava all day. That evening, Roman took her to dinner in a place that did not feel part of the same city as campus coffee and fluorescent libraries. The restaurant sat high above Michigan Avenue, hidden behind velvet drapes and smoked glass, all candlelight and polished silver and low music that wrapped around the room like expensive perfume. The hostess greeted Roman by name, and the entire room seemed to reorient around his presence when he walked in. Ava had not planned on seeing him that night. He had sent a dress to her dorm with no note, only a black garment bag and a pair of heels in the exact same soft champagne shade. The dress had been liquid silk, simple and devastating cut in a way that made her feel both elegant and newly aware of every line of her own body. She should have been offended. Instead, she stood in her dorm bathroom, fingers brushing the smooth fabric over her hips, staring at the girl in the mirror and realizing she had never looked like this for anyone before. Roman looked at her only once when she stepped out of the elevator into his penthouse, but that one look was enough to make her pulse trip. For a moment he said nothing. Then he crossed the room, opened a small velvet box, and took out a pair of pearl drop earrings. Lift your hair. Ava obeyed before thinking better of it. His fingers brushed the side of her neck as he fastened the earrings one and then the other. A tiny movement. A small touch. Still, her knees nearly forgot how to hold her. You planned all this, she murmured. Roman met her eyes in the mirror. Yes. Do you always do that? When something matters. He said it so simply that she had no answer. At the restaurant, whispers followed them from the moment they entered. Not loud enough to be rude. Not soft enough to miss. Ava felt them like static over her skin. Roman seemed completely untouched by it. His hand rested at the small of her back as they crossed the room, not pressing, just there, warm through the silk. At the table, he ordered without looking at the menu. The sommelier smiled too carefully. A man across the room lifted a glass toward Roman in silent acknowledgement and received the slightest nod in return. Everything around him spoke the same language, power that did not need volume. Ava took a sip of wine, trying to ignore the attention. Roman watched her over the rim of his own glass. You can ask. She looked up. Ask what? What everyone in this room is thinking. Ava let out a faint breath. Why they care who you came here with? Roman set down his glass. Because I do not usually bring anyone. That should have felt flattering. It did. It also made a knot tighten somewhere under her ribs. And tonight they look because you are with me. The words moved through her like a match held too close to skin. Roman's hand found hers on the white tablecloth. Not a grab, not a command, just his fingers closing over hers with deliberate possession. His thumb swept once across her knuckles. Let them look, he said quietly. Ava should have pulled back. She did not. She told herself she only liked the warmth of his hand. The certainty in it. The way he looked at her as if no one else in the room deserved his full attention. But beneath all that was another feeling darker and harder to name. It thrilled her to be chosen so completely by a man everyone else seemed to orbit from a distance. The drive back to this penthouse was quiet. Chicago blurred past in wet lights and mirrored glass. Ava sat with one hand folded in her lap and the other curled around the silk of her dress, still feeling the pressure of Roman's fingers over hers. Inside the penthouse, the city lay beneath them in gold and black. Roman loosened his tie and crossed to the bar. Ava slipped off her heels near the sofa and stood barefoot on the rug, suddenly aware of how intimate silence could become in a room like this. Roman returned with 2 glasses of wine and handed one to her. You were quiet on the ride. So were you. I know why. Ava took the glass, her fingers grazing his. Then tell me. Roman studied her face for a long moment. Because you are trying to decide whether tonight was beautiful or dangerous. Heat rose behind her ribs. What if it was both? Roman stepped closer just enough that she could smell cedar and clean smoke on his skin. Then you are finally asking the right question. Ava's breath slowed, then changed. For a second, neither moved. Then she said the thing she had not planned to say, the thing that had sat under her skin all night. I have never done this before. Roman's expression did not change, but something in his eyes sharpened. Done what? All of it. Her voice came lower now, steadier than she felt. Gone somewhere like that. Worn something like this. Been looked at like I was someone's answer. Roman set his glass down, very carefully. That is not what you meant. Ava looked away, then back. Number. The room grew quieter. She had imagined this confession before, but never here. Never with him. Never in a penthouse lit by city fire and silence. There should have been shame in it. Instead, there was only trembling honesty. I was with Ethan a year, she said. There was a night I thought I was ready. I wanted to be. But when it came down to it, my whole body just said no. Roman did not move. Ava swallowed. I thought maybe something was wrong with me. Slowly, Roman reached up and touched her chin, turning her face back toward him. His fingers were warm and impossibly steady. Nothing was wrong with you. Ava's lashes lowered. You say things like you know. I do know this. His thumb shifted once barely there, and yet her pulse answered it instantly. Your body knew before your pride did. The words broke something open inside her. She looked at him then, with no room left for pretending. Roman did not fill that space with hunger right away. He held it. Respected it. That made him more dangerous than if he had pounced. Ava's voice came quiet. Why do you act like losing things is a war? For the first time that night, Roman's gaze shifted from her face to the city beyond the glass. When I was 17, my father trusted the wrong men. His voice was low and stripped of all ornament. By 20, I was burying family and cleaning up debts that were not mine. Since then, I have learned one rule. If you do not control what matters, someone stronger, crueler, or more patient will take it. Ava's heart tightened. Is that how you see people? As things that can be taken. Roman looked back at her. Number. Then what am I? His hand fell from her chin to the side of her neck. Gentle. Heavy with awareness. A woman I should have walked away from the night I met her. Ava could hear her own breath. She could hear his too. Why didn't you? Roman's mouth hovered a fraction from hers. Because I did not want to. It was Ava who closed the distance. Not much. Just enough for her mouth to brush his once tentative and trembling to test whether the heat she had been carrying for days had a shape. Roman held still for half a second as if giving her every chance to retreat. Then his hand slid to the back of her neck and he kissed her fully. Not rough, not yet, just deep enough to make the world tilt. Ava gripped the front of his shirt. Roman's other hand came to her waist, spanning it through silk, drawing her a little nearer, just enough to let her feel how carefully controlled he still was. His mouth moved over hers with unbearable patience, like a man who knew exactly how fast he could undo someone, and had chosen not to. When they finally broke apart, Ava was breathing like she had climbed too many stairs. Roman rested his forehead lightly against hers. "Look at me." She did. His eyes were darker now, stripped down to something more primal than composure. "Nothing happens because you are hurt," he said. "Nothing happens because you are trying to forget someone else. It happens because you want it." Ava's voice shook. "And if I do?" Roman's hand tightened once at her waist. "Then tell me that when you are certain." He kissed her again, slower this time, and the city seemed to disappear around them. That night did not feel like a fall. It felt like crossing a threshold she had once mistaken for fear, and now recognized as trust. Roman carried none of Ethan's carelessness, none of that boyish hunger to claim before understanding. Every touch felt measured against her breathing, her expression, the tiny flinch of uncertainty she barely knew how to hide. There was desire in him enough to darken the room, but there was restraint, too. The combination undid her more thoroughly than force ever could have. By morning, Ava woke wrapped in sheets that smelled faintly of cedar and cool linen. Roman's arm heavy across her waist, his breathing even behind her. For a suspended second, she did not move. There was a stillness to waking beside someone that could terrify or comfort. With Roman somehow it did both. She lay there, listening to the city hum through the glass, aware of the heat of his body at her back, aware too of the silver bracelet still circling her wrist, and the truth it represented. She had crossed one line. The others had not disappeared. They had only become easier to ignore in the dark. Roman's hand shifted slightly, his palm flattening over her stomach as he woke. "You're thinking too loudly." Ava smiled despite herself. "That is not a real thing. With you it is." She rolled onto her back. Roman looked down at her hair, slightly mussed face, softer with sleep than she had ever seen it. He brushed his knuckles over her cheek. "Stay tonight." The words were simple, not dramatic, yet Ava heard the deeper note beneath them. "Not tonight alone. Not only this bed. Stay in the rhythm of me." She should have said no. Instead she whispered, "I have class at 10. Roman did not smile. "I did not ask about 10. By the end of that week, Ava had spent more nights in Roman's penthouse than in her dorm. Her textbooks appeared on his dining table. Her skincare bag sat by the sink in the guest bath, then disappeared into a drawer she had not put it in. One morning she found a silk robe folded at the foot of the bed in a color she never would have chosen for herself, and somehow loved the moment she touched it. The line between visiting and belonging began to blur. Sophie saw it clearly before Ava did. "You are vanishing," she said one afternoon, catching Ava by the arm outside the library. "You are here physically, but your whole life is somewhere else." Ava shifted her bag higher on her shoulder. "That is dramatic." "No dramatic as dating a man rumored to own half this city and then pretending it means nothing. It does not mean nothing." Sophie's expression softened for one breath, then sharpened again. "That is exactly what I am afraid of." Later that night, rain tapped softly against the glass, while Roman stood in the kitchen in shirt sleeves pouring her a second glass of wine. Ava sat barefoot on one of the stools, chin resting on her hand, watching him with the quiet fascination she no longer tried to hide. Roman set the wine in front of her, then remained standing between her knees. "I have something to say." Ava tilted her face up. "That sounds serious." "It is." His hands came to either side of her on the marble counter. Not trapping, surrounding. "Move in." For a second, Ava thought she had misheard him. Then she laughed softly out of pure disbelief. "You cannot be serious." "I am. Roman." He held her gaze without blinking. "I sleep better when I know where you are." Ava searched his face for irony and found none. "That is not romantic." "No," he said quietly. "It is not." The truth of it pressed into the space between them, raw and unvarnished. No flowers, no seduction, just possession laid bare in its cleanest form. Ava's pulse beat once hard enough to hurt. She looked at his hands, braced beside her, at the city behind him, at the life that could swallow hers if she stepped too far in without naming what it would cost. And even then, even with Sophie's warning still echoing in her mind, even with the bracelet on her wrist and Roman's control threading through every beautiful moment they had shared, she could not pretend she did not feel the pull. It was not only him, it was what he offered. Shelter, intensity, the illusion that someone strong enough to command the world might choose to build a corner of it entirely around her. Ava set her hand over his wrist, not accepting, not refusing. Just feeling the power there, and somewhere deep beneath the warmth, the want, and the dangerous comfort of his nearness, the line between being loved and being claimed began to blur in ways she could no longer afford not to see. That truth found her sooner than she wanted it to. The next morning, Chicago woke under a low white sky, all stone and river and cold light. Ava left Roman's building in one of her own sweaters and the same jeans she had worn the day before, her books pressed against her chest, her thoughts moving in restless circles. Roman had kissed her once in the elevator lobby, a slow, quiet kiss that made the doorman look respectfully away. Then he had sent her to campus in the black SUV, as if that had become the most natural arrangement in the world. On the ride over, her phone buzzed with a message from Sophie. "You are having lunch with me today? No excuses." Ava smiled faintly. Before she could answer, another message came through from an unfamiliar university address. "Ava, if you have a moment after your noon seminar, I would love to speak with you about your final paper. Daniel Mercer." She read it twice. Professor Mercer taught one of the most difficult electives in the department, a graduate-level sociology seminar on gender institutions and the politics of private life. He had a reputation for being brilliant, demanding, and impossible to impress. Ava had spent half the semester trying to stay one step ahead in that class. She had also spent half the semester quietly admiring him for the way he could walk into a room, say very little, and still make every student sit up straighter. For the first time all morning, something inside her lit clean and bright, untouched by Roman, untouched by Ethan, untouched by any man's shadow. Maybe this is about the paper, she thought. Maybe it is something earned. The seminar passed in a blur of underlined notes and restless concentration. Mercer lectured from the front of the room in a dark blazer and open collar sleeves, turned back his voice, measured and calm. When class ended, students rose slowly, still talking through the reading. Ava packed her books and stood only to hear his voice from the aisle. "Ms. Bennett, a minute." The room thinned around her. By the time the last of her classmates had left, Mercer was leaning against the front desk, one hand in his pocket, studying her with an expression she had always read as thoughtful. "Your final paper was exceptional," he said. Ava felt heat move into her face. "Thank you, Professor. I do not hand out praise casually." "No, you do not." Something close to a smile touched his mouth. "That is one reason I am speaking to you now." He crossed to his desk, lifted a folder, and held it out to her. Ava took it. Inside was a formal notice for a summer research assistantship tied to the department's graduate program. Paid, competitive, prestigious. For a second, she forgot to breathe. "I do not understand." Mercer folded his arms. "It means I would like you to work with me this summer. Research prep field review. Archival work, maybe some co-development if you are as strong in person as you are on paper." Ava looked from the letter to his face. Her chest had gone tight with something brighter than hope. Relief. Pride. The old, hungry kind that came from being seen for what she could do, not how she looked, not what some man wanted from her, but for the work she had fought to build quietly on her own. "Professor, I do not know what to say. You could start with yes." A breathless laugh escaped her before she could stop it. Yes, absolutely." "Good." He stepped closer and tapped the edge of the letter. "This could help you if you are serious about graduate school." "I am. I thought so." The words should have felt simple. They did, at least then. Ava spent the next hour half floating through campus. The stone paths looked brighter. The bare trees seemed less winter gray and more silver in the light. Even the wind off the lake felt almost welcome. She called Sophie first, who screamed loud enough through the phone that Ava had to hold it away from her ear. Then she sat on a bench outside the library and stared at the offer letter again. It was real. Something she had wanted before Roman, before Ethan, before any of the chaos of the last week. Something that belonged entirely to her mind and her future. By the time Roman's car pulled up at the curb after her final class, she was eager, glowing, full of the kind of happiness that needed to be spoken aloud. He was already behind the wheel. Roman rarely drove himself. The fact that he had tonight gave the moment a strange intimacy, as if the rest of the city had been dismissed for an hour, and only the two of them remained. Ava slid into the passenger seat and shut the door against the cold. Roman turned his head and looked at her once. "You are pleased with yourself." The corner of her mouth lifted. "I am." He leaned in and kissed her before she could say more. His mouth was warm, deliberate, familiar enough now to send that same quick pull low in her stomach. When he drew back, his fingers brushed her cheek. "Tell me." Ava reached into her bag and took out the folder. "Professor Mercer offered me a summer assistantship." Roman's expression did not change at first. "It is paid." Ava went on, words coming faster with excitement. "Research prep department support, probably a lot of archival work and maybe field review. He said it could help with graduate school. Roman, this is huge." His hand stilled where it rested near the gear shift. "Mercer." She looked at him. "Yes." Roman started the engine, but did not pull away yet. "How old is he?" Ava blinked. "What?" "This professor." "I do not know. Late 30s, maybe?" Roman's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "And he selected you?" Ava laughed softly, still not understanding. "Yes, because my paper was good." Roman's gaze went to the windshield. "What course does he teach?" "Gender and institutions." A beat passed, then another. The mood inside the car shifted so quietly it took Ava a second to recognize it. The warmth was gone. The easy attention. In its place came something flatter, colder, controlled with such effort that it chilled the air more than anger would have. "I do not want you working alone with him." The words landed hard enough to knock the happiness clean out of her. She turned in her seat. "Excuse me." Roman pulled away from the curb. "You heard me." Ava stared at him. "That is your response." "My response is that I do not like another man placing himself in your future under the excuse of helping you." Ava actually laughed then, but there was no amusement in it. "He is my professor. He is a man. So are you." Roman looked at her then only for a second, but his eyes had darkened. "Yes." The city moved around them in streaks of gray and red light. Ava pressed the folder tighter against her lap. "This is not about you. It became about me when it became about you." "Roman." He cut in before she could finish. "You are 22. He is nearly 40. Men like that do not go looking for bright girls because they care so much about education." The words hit too many nerves at once. Her pride, her work, the careful self she had built before him. "Do not do that," she said sharply. "Do what?" "Reduce this to some man wanting me because he looked at my face before he looked at my paper." Roman's voice stayed low. "You think men do not do both?" Ava could feel the anger rise, now hot and clean. "I think you do not get to decide the meaning of every room I walk into." His hands tightened on the wheel. "I decide what risks matter." "No," Ava said. "You decide what you can tolerate." Silence filled the car. The city outside had begun to blur into evening. Storefront lights came on one by one. A train rattled overhead somewhere to their left. Ava could hear her own breathing now, too fast, too sharp. Roman spoke without looking at her. "I do not want my woman in another man's orbit." The sentence struck her with the force of something physical. She turned to him fully. "Your woman." Roman said nothing. Ava's pulse beat hard at her throat. "I am not a thing you place somewhere safe and then circle with guards." He kept driving. "I am talking about your safety." "No, you're talking about control." Roman's mouth set. "I know the difference." "Do you?" That landed. She saw it. A flicker in his face gone almost before it appeared. The only sign that she had finally hit the exact wound beneath all that composure. Ava looked down at the silver bracelet around her wrist. She could feel its weight suddenly more than metal, more than jewelry. A symbol. A line crossed because she had been hurt enough to mistake possession for comfort. "This matters to me," she said, quieter now but fiercer for it. "This is not some dinner reservation you can rearrange. It is my work, my future. You do not get to tell me where ambition becomes inappropriate." Roman's gaze stayed fixed on the road. "And I do not have to like another man inserting himself into your life." Ava stared at him. For one suspended second, she understood with painful clarity that his love, if this was love, would always carry the shape of conquest unless someone forced it to change. "Stop the car." Roman did not react at first. "Ava, stop the car." The SUV slowed, then pulled sharply to the curb on a side street lined with bare trees and old brick apartment buildings. Rain had begun again, a cold, fine mist on the windows. Ava reached for the handle. "You are overreacting," Roman said. She turned back, disbelief burning right through her. "I am overreacting because I do not want my life filtered through your fear." Roman's face had gone still in that dangerous way again. "I am trying to protect you." Ava's voice shook now, but she did not lower it. "From what? A professor, a classroom, a future that does not ask your permission." She shoved the folder back into her bag and opened the door. "Ava." She looked at him one last time. For one terrible moment, she saw not only the man who had held her like she was precious, listened to her like she mattered, watched her like she was the center of every room, but the other thing, too. The deeper thing. The instinct that wanted to close a hand around everything it loved and never let air reach it again. "I am not coming tonight," she said. Then she stepped out into the cold and shut the door. She did not run. She would not give him that picture. She walked the 6 blocks back to campus with rain catching in her hair and anger making her steps hard and fast. By the time she reached her dorm, her cheeks were wet, and she could not tell how much of it was weather. That night she did not answer her phone. Roman called once, then not again. That silence almost hurt more. Near midnight, unable to sit still, Ava crossed to the narrow dorm window and pulled back the curtain. His Escalade was parked across the street. Lights off, engine dead. Just there, her breath caught. A normal man would have texted. A healthier man might have stayed away. Roman sat in the dark like a threat, a vigil or a confession he did not know how to make. Ava stood at the window for a long time, fingers pressed against the glass. She hated that part of her wanted to go down there. Hated even more that another part wanted him to leave on his own. By dawn, the car was gone. The next morning, campus buzzed with the cheap electricity of gossip. Phones out, heads bent together, smirks exchanged over coffee and laptop screens. Ava felt the shift before she knew the cause. She was halfway through a line at the campus cafe when Sophie appeared at her elbow with a face that already told her enough. "Do not panic." Ava closed her eyes briefly. "That means I should panic." Sophie held up her phone. A local society account had posted grainy photos from the restaurant. Roman's hand at Ava's waist. Ava in the champagne dress. Roman leaning down toward her at the car door. The caption was worse. Chicago's untouchable king seen with mystery college girl. Ava felt all the air leave her lungs at once. Around them, the room had not gone silent, but it had grown more focused. She could feel people pretending not to stare. "Oh my God," she whispered. Sophie lowered the phone. "It is going to blow over. That is not the point." "No, I know." Ava looked around the room and saw recognition blooming in faces she did not even know. A boy from her statistics course glanced at her, then at his screen, then back up with open curiosity. 2 girls by the condiment counter whispered behind their hands. Ava sat down hard at the nearest table. For the first time since Roman entered her life, she felt the cost of being seen beside him by the world he moved through so easily. Until then, his power had mostly enclosed her in private rooms, black cars, quiet dinners. Now it spilled out into public, flattening her into a type, a girl, a mystery, a rumor in heels. Sophie slid into the seat across from her. "Look at me." Ava did. "You are not what that caption says." A humorless laugh escaped her. "It does not matter. Everyone already decided what they are seeing." Sophie reached across and squeezed her hand. "You know who you are?" Ava thought of the assistantship letter in her bag and did not answer. Later that afternoon, after the stares and the whispers and an entire lecture, she barely heard Ava cross the sociology building to meet Professor Mercer and finalize the paperwork. She had almost canceled. Pride stopped her. The department hallways were quiet, washed in late light. Mercer's office door stood open, but he was just stepping out as she approached, jacket over one arm, reading glasses in hand. "Ms. Bennett." "Professor, I was hoping to sign the forms." "Of course." He smiled and nodded toward the side garden entrance rather than the office itself. "Walk with me a moment." Ava hesitated only briefly, then followed him out beneath the stone arch and into the small enclosed courtyard behind the department. Winter had stripped the ivy from the walls. The fountain in the center was dry for the season. Mercer slowed near a bench. "You seemed distracted yesterday." Ava tried to smile politely. "It was a long day." "I imagine so." Something in his tone made her glance up. He was watching her with unusual directness, not the calm academic focus she knew from class. Something more personal sat beneath it now, harder to name and impossible to ignore once noticed. "I wanted to say," he continued, "that opportunities like this are not only about scholarship. They are about fit, trust, chemistry." Ava stood very still. "I understand the work is collaborative." Mercer stepped closer. "Yes, collaborative." Too close. Ava's grip tightened on the strap of her bag. He lowered his voice. "You are remarkable, Ava. Bright, beautiful, serious. Not many students have your kind of presence." The words hit her like cold water. "Professor, I've been watching you all semester." Ava took a half step back. His expression softened into what he likely thought was warmth. There is no need to be nervous. I'm saying this because I think there could be real value in a closer working relationship. Her stomach turned. In one blinding second, Roman's ugly suspicion and her own fierce defense of Mercer crashed together inside her chest. Professor Mercer, she said carefully, I respect you very much, but if this conversation is not about the assistantship, I should go. He moved again, another small step, one hand lifting as if to soothe her. You are misreading me. His fingers brushed under her jaw. Ava recoiled instantly. The shock of it froze her where she stood. Then a voice cut across the courtyard, cold enough to strip the air bare. Take your hand off her. Mercer dropped his arm and turned. Roman was already halfway across the stone path. A black coat. Dark suit. No rush in his stride because none was needed. Fury on him looked almost elegant until you saw his eyes. Ava's heart slammed once against her ribs. Roman. He did not look at her. He stopped directly between her and Mercer, close enough that the professor had to angle his shoulders back. Mercer tried first for indignation. This is inappropriate. Roman's voice stayed even. You put your hand on her. You have misunderstood. Roman took one more step. No, he said. You assumed she was alone. Mercer's face changed then. Not guilt, exactly. Fear. The fast, thin kind that rises when a man realizes the person in front of him belongs to a world where polished language stops mattering. I was only trying to reassure her, Mercer said. I think perhaps she became uncomfortable because of the publicity around her recently. Roman's gaze did not shift. If you touch her again, your career ends in the same week. Ava found her voice. Roman, stop. He still did not turn. Mercer swallowed hard. I think given all this, the department may no longer be the right fit for the assistantship. There it was, the coward's exit, withdrawal disguised as discretion. Ava stared at him. For 1 second, humiliation hit harder than anger. Not because Roman had been wrong, but because the moment he was right. Something of hers had been taken anyway. Mercer backed toward the building. I am sorry, Ms. Bennett. She almost laughed. He disappeared inside. Only then did Roman turn to her. Are you hurt? Ava looked at him as if from a great distance. He had come because of the bracelet, of course. Because he knew where she was. Because perhaps he knew more than that. Because somewhere in his world, men watched and reported and moved before she had the chance to understand she was being watched at all. You are everywhere, she whispered. Roman's expression shifted. Ava. No. Her voice broke, then hardened. No. Do not say my name like that. Rain had begun again, thin and cold in the courtyard air. Roman took one slow step toward her. I was right. She stared at him. The words landed like a slap. You were right, she repeated. Do you hear yourself? That man would have taken advantage of you. And you do not. His face went still. Ava's eyes burned now. My ex wanted to own me. My professor wanted to use me. And you keep calling it protection while you decide where I go, who I see, what opportunities are acceptable when I need rescuing, and how close is too close if it is not you. Roman's jaw tightened. I am trying to keep you safe. Ava let out a sharp, shaking breath. I cannot breathe inside your version of safe. The sentence hung between them naked and final. For the first time since she met him, Roman looked struck. Not angry, not cold, wounded. That almost made it worse. He reached for her arm. Ava pulled away before he could touch her. I need you to leave me alone. His hand dropped. Rain darkened the shoulders of his coat. A muscle moved once in his jaw. The city noise beyond the courtyard walls seemed suddenly very far away. Roman said nothing. Ava turned and walked out through the archway with tears hot on her face and fury keeping her upright. She kept walking past the department, past the library steps, past the students who turned to look and then looked away. By the time she reached the edge of campus, she was shaking. That night, the city felt colder than it had in weeks. Roman went back to his penthouse alone. He poured whiskey and did not drink it. His phone stayed silent on the marble counter. The bracelet system showed no alert, no threat, no emergency. Only the quiet fact of her moving farther from him through streets he could not command without losing her completely. Ava sat in her dorm room with the assistantship letter still in her bag and Sophie's coat over her shoulders, staring at the dark window until the glass reflected a girl who finally understood that love could feel like shelter and suffocation in the same breath. Neither of them slept. Chicago carried on beneath both windows, indifferent and glittering, while the space between them grew heavy enough to change the shape of everything that had come before. The distance Ava asked for did not feel like freedom at first. It felt like withdrawal. The next 2 days passed in strange, airless fragments. She went to class. She took notes she barely remembered writing. She answered Sophie when spoken to and ignored her phone when it stayed silent long enough to make her restless. Roman did exactly what she had asked. He stayed away. No black SUV at the curb. No messages waiting the second her lectures ended. No flowers, no gifts, no attempts to force his way back in through charm or pressure. That should have made everything easier. Instead, it left behind the shape of him in every hour. She noticed it most at night. In the dorm, the walls felt too thin, the mattress too narrow, the hallway noise too bright and careless. She had not realized how quickly Roman's penthouse had taught her another kind of silence. The kind that wrapped itself around a room and made even breathing feel intimate. Here, doors slammed. Girls laughed too loudly 3 rooms down. Someone burned microwave popcorn after midnight, and the smell lingered until morning. Ava lay awake staring at the ceiling and hated herself for missing a man she had just accused of smothering her. On the 3rd evening, Sophie stood in Ava's doorway with a black dress draped over one arm, and a look that clearly meant resistance would be treated as a personal insult. Number. Sophie tossed the dress onto the bed. That was not a question. Ava did not look up from the paper she had been pretending to read for 20 minutes. I am not in the mood. That is exactly why you are going. Ava pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of her nose. Sophie, you have spent 48 hours haunting this room like a Victorian widow, and I am done watching it. There is a final party tonight at Martin Hale's warehouse. Half the graduating class will be there, which means enough noise, alcohol, and bad life choices to make this week bearable. Ava gave her a flat look. You make it sound charming. It is not charming. It is useful. Sophie crossed the room, pulled open Ava's closet, and started sorting through clothes with ruthless efficiency. Ava let her because she was too tired to argue properly. The black dress Sophie finally chose was shorter than Ava usually wore and far more fitted through the waist. Paired with heeled boots and her old leather jacket, it changed her reflection just enough that she did not entirely recognize herself. Her hair fell in loose waves around her shoulders. A darker mouth, a steadier stare. When she came out of the bathroom, Sophie looked up from the desk chair and let out a low whistle. There, that is not the girl who cried in a courtyard. Ava grabbed her bag. No, she is still here. Sophie stood and came closer, one hand briefly touching Ava's arm. I know, but tonight she gets to dance. The party lived exactly where Sophie said it would. In a converted brick warehouse on the west side where old steel beams cut through blue light and the floor shook with bass-heavy music. Students packed the room shoulder to shoulder. The air smelled like spilled beer perfume sweat, and cold air dragged in each time the loading door opened. Laser light moved across faces made loose by graduation and exhaustion. For the first hour, Ava let the noise do its work. She danced with Sophie and 2 girls from political theory. She drank something strong and fizzy from a plastic cup. She laughed once genuinely when one of the speakers cut out, and the crowd booed in unison before the music slammed back harder than before. It was not peace, but it was movement. It was enough. Then she felt a hand close around her wrist. Ava turned too fast, pulse jumping. Ethan. Of course. He looked good in the most irritating way possible. Black sweater, expensive haircut, the same face that had once seemed open and easy and now looked weak under bad lighting. A little flushed from drinking, a little bitter around the eyes. You have been hard to find. Ava pulled her wrist free. Try harder. Ethan gave a soft, incredulous laugh. That is how you are going to play this. There is no this. Music thundered around them, but in the small circle of space between their bodies, everything felt abruptly sharp and clear. Sophie saw him from across the floor and started moving toward them, but Ava lifted one hand slightly without taking her eyes off Ethan. Not yet. He leaned closer, voice raised over the beat. So it is true then. Ava said nothing. The photos, the car, the whole city talking about you and that guy. That guy has a name. Ethan's mouth twisted. Right. Roman Moretti. He said the name with forced carelessness and obvious dislike. Ava folded her arms. If you have a point, make it. Ethan's gaze dragged over her dress, her boots, the leather jacket, the darker lipstick. You have changed. Good. No, it is just funny. He laughed again, but there was acid under it now. 1 week and suddenly you are this whole other person. Guess your rich gangster really showed you a few things. The words landed hot and ugly. Ava stared at him. He saw it and kept going. What too honest? You would not give anything to me for a year, and now half of Chicago is watching you climb into his car like you belong there. She could feel Sophie behind her now, feel her tension, feel the way the people nearest them were beginning to sense something worth watching. Ethan leaned in, voice lower, uglier. I guess there really was a woman under all that innocence. You just needed someone with money and power to bring her out. The beer in Ava's hand hit him before the thought had fully formed. Cold liquid splashed across his sweater, his jaw, his mouth. The nearest circle of students went silent. Ethan froze. Ava set the empty cup on the edge of a speaker and stepped closer. Not loud, not wild, only cold. You do not get to stand here and talk about my body as if you ever earned access to it. Ethan wiped at his face, stunned. You cheated on me. Yes, she said. And you did me the favor of ending something that should have died earlier. His expression hardened. So that is it. You are in love with him. The question should have stopped her. Instead, something inside her steadied. Maybe it was anger, maybe clarity, maybe the simple relief of hearing the truth spoken by someone she no longer needed to protect. Ava held his gaze. I am glad it was not you. The words cut. She saw that. Ethan's mouth opened, but she was already stepping back. Stay away from me, she said. Whatever is broken in you does not get to touch me again. She turned before he could answer and walked straight into Sophie's waiting grasp. Sophie caught her elbow and steered her through the crowd toward the loading door and the cold air outside. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The street behind the warehouse was wet and nearly empty. Music pulsed dimly through brick walls. Then Sophie looked at her and laughed in pure disbelief. You threw a beer in his face. Ava leaned against the wall and let out one shaky breath. Yes. How do you feel? Ava looked up at the winter sky. For the first time in days, the answer came easily. Clear. Sophie's smile softened. That is new. Ava nodded once. It was. Because Ethan no longer mattered. Not the way he had. Not as the beginning or the ending of anything. He was just a boy who had taken too much space in her mind and now no longer fit there. The problem was that once Ethan was stripped away, what remained in the center of her chest was Roman. Not only his touch or his voice or the physical gravity of him. Something harder. The fact that she had been angry with him because he mattered enough to wound her. The fact that when she told him she could not breathe inside his love, she had not stopped loving him. Sophie watched her face change. Oh no, she said quietly. Ava let out a humorless laugh. I know. You are thinking about him. Yes. Sophie folded her arms against the cold. That is not automatically a reason to do something stupid. Ava pushed away from the wall. Number, which means you are going to. Ava looked toward the city lights beyond the industrial blocks, toward downtown, somewhere in the distance, where glass towers rose above the dark river, and one of them held a man who had not called because she asked him not to. He gave me space, she said softly. Sophie frowned. Bare minimum behavior is not a grand gesture. I know. Then why does that sound like it matters? Ava looked down at the bracelet still circling her wrist. Because even from a distance, Roman had obeyed her in the only way that counted. He had not forced his way back in. He had not bargained. He had not turned apology into seduction. He had done something much harder for a man like him. He had stopped. It matters, Ava said, because he did not make me fight for the silence. Sophie went very still. Then she sighed. I hate that I understand why that matters to you. Ava reached up and touched the cool metal at her wrist. I am not going back to surrender. Sophie searched her face. Then what are you going back to do? Ava met her eyes. To choose. She left 10 minutes later. A rideshare carried her through the city in streaks of reflected streetlight and dark river glass. The farther east they drove, the quieter she became. Her anger had burned down into something cleaner now. Not weakness, not craving. Intention. By the time the car pulled beneath Roman's building, she knew exactly what she needed to say first. The private elevator rose in absolute silence. Ava watched herself in the mirrored wall. Black dress, bare legs, leather jacket, eyes too bright, the bracelet flashing pale at her wrist. When the doors opened onto the penthouse foyer, she did not hesitate. Roman opened the door before she knocked. For one suspended second, neither of them moved. He was in a white shirt with the sleeves rolled back and dark trousers, no jacket, no tie. His face gave nothing away at first. Then his gaze fell to her dress, her mouth the storm still alive in her eyes, and something changed. Not relief. Something deeper and more dangerous than relief. Ava. She stepped past him into the apartment without answering. The penthouse looked the same. Amber light, black stone. The city spilled beneath the glass. Yet after 2 nights away, everything felt sharpened, as if absence had stripped the place down to what it actually was. Beautiful, controlled, built to hold a man who hated uncertainty. Roman shut the door behind her. "Were you at the party?" Ava turned slowly to face him. "You know I was." His gaze flicked to the bracelet and back to her face. No denial. That more than anything made her pulse settle. She lifted her hand between them. "Give me the key." Roman did not move. The room went very still. "Ava, give me the key." His eyes stayed on hers. No anger, no charm. Just a long, unreadable silence in which she could almost feel him measuring all the ways this moment mattered. "You told me I could take it off whenever I wanted," she said. "So give me the key." Roman reached into his pocket. For a second, she thought he might argue first. Explain. Resist. Instead, he drew out a small silver key and placed it in her palm without speaking. The metal was warm from his body. Ava looked down at it, then at the bracelet. Her fingers were steady as she slid the key into the hidden clasp. There was a soft click. The bracelet loosened and fell into her other hand. The sound it made when she set it on the marble console between them was almost nothing. Still, it felt louder than any argument they had ever had. Roman watched her. Ava held his gaze. "If I stay tonight," she said, "it will not be because you own me. It will be because I walked back in here myself." For the first time since she met him, his composure slipped in a way only she would have noticed. Not much, just enough to reveal the depth of what it cost him to stand there and let her say it. "I know," he said. The answer moved through her harder than if he had tried to fight. Ava crossed the distance and kissed him first. Not softly, not as a peace offering, as a decision. Roman caught her waist instinctively, his body tightening under her hands, but he did not seize control. He let her lead the shape of it, let her set the pace. Her fingers moved to the buttons of his shirt, undoing the first one, then the second, while his breath changed against her mouth. When she drew back, his eyes were dark enough to look almost black in the low light. "Ava." "Tonight," she said quietly, "you listen." Something like astonishment flickered through him. Then hunger followed. She took his hand and led him toward the bedroom. The city glowed cold behind the glass. The room itself was all shadow and clean lines. The bed raised slightly above the floor, sheets turned down in white against black wood. Ava had crossed this threshold before, but never like this. Never with this steadiness in her blood. Roman stood at the edge of the bed and watched her as if she were something both precious and dangerous. And perhaps for the first time he understood the two could exist in the same woman. Ava slid his shirt from his shoulders and let it fall. Her hands moved over his chest, learning again the hard warmth of him, the restraint that lived even in muscle. He reached for her, and she caught his wrists lightly. "Not yet." His mouth curved faintly, but there was nothing playful in his eyes. "Number." She found the silk scarf folded on the bedside table and held it up. Roman looked at it, then back at her face. "You want that?" "Yes." A beat passed. Then he inclined his head once. Ava stepped closer and tied the scarf over his eyes. When she finished, she rested her fingertips briefly at the back of his neck and felt how steady he forced himself to stay for her. That steadiness undid her more than impatience would have. She kissed him, then slower this time, with the power shifted just enough that both of them could feel it. Roman exhaled against her mouth, his hands flexing once at his sides before settling. He was letting her guide him into uncertainty, letting her become the thing he could not fully predict. That was the gift hidden inside all his fear, not his control, his surrender. What followed belonged less to heat than to trust. Ava touched him with deliberateness, gave and withheld, spoke softly, and expected him to obey. Not to punish him. To make him feel what it was to stand inside desire without owning it. To receive. To wait. To be undone by someone else's choice. And Roman let her. He let her press him back onto the bed. Let her hold his wrists for one moment when instinct almost made him reach. Let her whisper against his mouth, "Say it." His breath caught. "Say what?" "That you are mine tonight." The silence that followed was not resistance. It was revelation. Then Roman said it in a low, rough voice she felt all the way through her. "I am yours." Ava closed her eyes briefly. Not because she believed it in some permanent foolish sense, but because the words carried no mockery, no compromise, no half-truth. For one night in one room he had opened his hands. Morning came quietly. Ava woke first. Pale dawn sat at the windows, turning the river silver. Roman slept on his side, one arm thrown across the sheets, dark hair fallen over his forehead, the scarf discarded sometime in the night. Without all that watchful control in his face, he looked younger. Not soft exactly, just human in a way the rest of the world probably never got to see. She slipped out of bed and pulled on one of his white shirts. The kitchen felt different with bare feet and early light, less like a fortress. More like a place where breath and coffee and small, ordinary sounds might actually belong. She found eggs, butterflower berries, enough to make something simple, something hers. By the time the coffee finished, she heard him behind her. Roman stopped in the doorway. For one long second, he said nothing. Ava turned with a pan in one hand. "Good morning?" His eyes moved over her slowly. The shirt, her hair loose around her shoulders, the plates on the counter, the coffee. The first woman, perhaps, to move around his kitchen without asking permission or performing gratitude. "You are making breakfast." Ava set the pan down. "Yes." Roman stepped closer, still looking at her as if the sight itself had altered something in the room. "No one has ever done that here. Maybe you never let anyone." That reached him. Roman came to stand directly in front of her. Close enough for warmth. Not close enough to interrupt. Probably not. Ava picked up the coffee cup she had poured for him and held it out. He took it without breaking eye contact. Then, because there was no point pretending anything had become simple just because the night had been beautiful, she said the truth. "I'm in love with you." Roman went absolutely still. The coffee cup remained in his hand untouched. Ava kept going because stopping now would turn honesty into cruelty. "That is the problem," she said. "Because I love you enough to come back here, and I also know I cannot survive being swallowed by your fear." Roman set the cup down very carefully. "Ava, no, let me finish." He did not interrupt again. She drew in a breath. "I am angry with you. I probably will be again. I do not trust all of your instincts because too many of them ask me to disappear into whatever makes you feel less afraid. But I am still here." Her throat tightened. "So if this is going to be real, it cannot look like ownership. Not again." Roman's face gave away almost nothing, only the force with which he listened. Ava touched the bare skin of his wrist where the pulse beat steady under her fingers. "I do not want a man above me. I do not want a keeper. I do not want to become a smaller version of myself just because you know how to make danger feel like devotion." His eyes closed for one brief second. When they opened again, there was something rawer in them than she had ever seen. "What do you want?" The question came low, honest, more vulnerable than any apology. Ava met his gaze. "I want a partner. Someone who can stand beside me without trying to lock every door around me. I want my work, my future, my mind. I want you, but not at the cost of myself." The apartment held the silence after that like something sacred. Roman looked at the breakfast she had made, then at the bracelet still lying where she had left it on the console in the other room, visible from the kitchen if he turned his head slightly. Finally, he looked back at her, and for once he answered without trying to bend the shape of what she had said. "Yes," he said quietly. Ava searched his face, waiting for the rest. The conditions, the negotiation, the hidden steel. None came. Just that one word carrying more weight than all his old promises of protection ever had. She stood there in the quiet morning, barefoot in his shirt, feeling how fragile and immense that moment really was. Not because everything had been solved, nothing that mattered ever was, but because for the first time since she met him, Roman was not asking how to keep her. He was learning how not to. Roman did not say anything else right away, and somehow that mattered more than if he had filled the kitchen with promises. He simply stood there in the cold silver light of morning, his white shirt open at the throat, his face stripped of every practiced defense she had come to know so well. The city behind him looked distant and unreal, all glass and river and pale dawn, as though Chicago itself had stepped back to listen. Ava had expected resistance, explanation, at the very least some instinctive reach for control disguised as compromise. Instead, Roman looked at her the way a man might look at the ruin of a house he had built with his own hands, and only just realized he had set too many locks on the doors. Finally, he spoke. "I disconnected the tracking network the night you left." Ava did not move. Roman's gaze dropped briefly to the counter between them, then rose again. "I should have done it sooner, I know that. The words entered her quietly, but they changed the air all the same. Ava had not expected him to go first. She had not expected confession where he used to place certainty. "You did not tell me." Roman's mouth shifted, not quite bitter, not quite amused. "You asked for distance, not a report." Ava studied him in the morning light. There was no performance in him now, no carefully calibrated charm, only fatigue and honesty, both of which looked almost foreign on a man built so completely out of control. "Why," she asked softly, "did you do it that night?" Roman rested both hands on the back of one of the kitchen chairs, not sitting, just grounding himself in the room. "Because after you said you could not breathe inside my version of safe, I went home and realized I had spent days watching your movements like they were proof I could keep the world from touching you." He paused. "And the relief I felt every time I knew exactly where you were disgusted me." Ava's chest tightened. Roman looked away for a moment toward the windows and the silver line of the river cutting through the city. "When I was young," he said, "every person I cared about became leverage for someone else. My father trusted men he should have buried earlier. My mother lived as if elegance could soften fear. My brother thought being loved made him untouchable." His jaw shifted once. None of them survived the lesson. Ava stood very still. Roman had offered pieces of his past before, but only fragments. Hard polished edges. This was something else. Not a story told to impress. A wound uncovered because she had asked him for truth, and he finally understood that truth was the only currency she would take from him now. He went on in the same low, even voice. "I built my life so no one would ever use what mattered to me again. Buildings, companies, alliances, people. I learned how to close my hand before anything could be stolen out of it." His eyes found hers. "Then you walked into a hotel bar looking like your heart had just been dragged through glass, and I did the worst thing a man like me could do. I wanted you before I understood what wanting you would make me." Ava felt the words move through her slower than breath. This was not romance polished into something easy to admire. It was darker than that. More useful, too, because for the first time, Roman was not asking her to forgive the shape of him. He was naming it. "You turned that fear on me," she said quietly. Roman did not flinch. "Yes." The single syllable struck harder than denial would have. Ava looked down at her own hands, at the faint mark where the bracelet had rested for days, a small pale memory at her wrist. When she looked back up, Roman was still there in exactly the same place, as if he would remain standing in that morning light until she decided what his honesty was worth. "My work still matters," she said. "My future still matters. What happened with Mercer does not change that." "It should not," Roman answered. Ava searched his face. "Do you mean that because you know you have to say it, or because you finally understand it?" Roman let out one slow breath. "Both." The answer was so direct she almost smiled. He saw it before it fully formed, and something in his expression softened. Then he crossed the room, not quickly, not with the confidence of a man assuming welcome, but with the care of someone approaching a line he had once crossed too easily. He stopped close enough that she could feel his warmth, close enough to touch if either of them chose to, and said in a voice lower than before, "Become the woman you have been working to become. Finish what matters to you. If there is a place in that life for me, I will earn it." Ava had not expected the sting of tears then. Not after arguments, not after anger, not after the kind of night that had remade the axis of power between them. But there it was all the same. The simple force of hearing him speak about staying in her life as something that required worth rather than dominance. She blinked once and looked away. Roman noticed. Of course he did. He always noticed. But for once he did not step in to manage the feeling. He let it breathe. That morning stretched longer than either of them intended. Breakfast went mostly cold while they talked in a way they never had before, without seduction as a shield, and without conflict sharpening every sentence. Ava told him what graduate school meant to her. Not prestige, not escape, structure, thought. The chance to build a life with her own mind at the center of it. She told him how long she had wanted to study the private bargains women made with power and fear, how often she had watched girls around her confuse intensity with respect, because no one taught them how to tell the difference. Roman listened with the same still attention that had first drawn her to him, but now there was something else inside it. Humility, perhaps, or the beginning of it. He told her things too, not everything. Roman did not seem built for total confession, but enough. Enough to let her see how young he had been when blood and debt and loyalty had become the grammar of his life. Enough to let her understand that his empire was not simply wealth but architecture against loss. Buildings raised like fortifications, businesses arranged like battalions, security everywhere because grief had once entered his life through every unlocked door. None of it excused what he had done to her, but it made him legible, and legibility Ava thought was not forgiveness. It was the first thing that made real love possible. By noon, the sky had brightened into a cold, clear blue. Roman took a call in his office, and Ava stood alone by the windows with a cup of coffee looking out over the river and the moving city below. She should have felt trapped up there. The strange thing was she did not. Not anymore. Not in that moment. Maybe because the choice to stay had become visible to her again. Maybe because the bracelet lay abandoned on the console like a relic of a version of them that could not survive if anything better was going to take shape. When Roman came back into the living room, he had changed into a charcoal suit. Tie undone, cuffs buttoned. The public version of him settling back into place, though not completely. She could still see the mourning in his face if she looked closely enough. "I have to go downtown for an hour," he said. Ava nodded. "All right." He stood there a second longer, then said, "I will have someone drive you anywhere you need to go." She tilted her head. "Do I need permission to refuse that now?" A faint shadow of a smile touched his mouth. "Number." "Good." Roman glanced toward the kitchen, then back to her. "Ava." She waited. "I'm trying." The simplicity of it reached her more directly than apology alone might have. "I know." He crossed to her, then one hand lifting slowly to touch her face. Not claiming. Asking. Ava leaned into it before she could think too hard about why. His thumb brushed once over her cheekbone. Then he kissed her. It was not the ravenous kind of kiss they had once used to escape difficult truths. It was quieter than that slower carrying restraint and need in equal measure. When he drew back, his forehead rested lightly against hers for one brief second. Then he left. Ava spent the afternoon on campus. She went first to see the department chair. Her heartbeat had gone wild walking into the office, but she had done it anyway. She explained carefully, clearly, without embellishment, what had happened with Mercer. Not every detail. Enough. Enough to place the truth where it could no longer be privately swallowed. The chair, a severe woman with silver hair and an expression carved by decades of academic politics, listened without interruption and asked exactly 3 questions. At the end, she said Mercer would be placed under formal review and that the assistantship would be reassigned once the department completed its internal process. Ava sat in stunned silence for a moment. "So I have not lost it." The woman removed her glasses. "You nearly did, because men often mistake access for talent. That is not your fault, Ms. Bennett. Do not make the common mistake of carrying their shame for them." By the time Ava left the office, her hands were shaking. But the shaking felt different now. Not helpless, not undone. Clear. She found Sophie outside the library steps with 2 coffees in hand, and impatience written all over her face. "Well," Ava took one of the cups and told her everything. Not everything, perhaps. Not the full shape of Roman's confession that morning, or the exact way his voice had changed when he said he would earn a place in her life. Those things still felt too private to put into open air. But enough. The department. Mercer. The bracelet. The key. Roman giving it over without argument. The night she returned. The morning after. Sophie listened the whole way through with one eyebrow slightly raised and a look that changed in small increments from suspicion to reluctant interest to something like concern on Ava's behalf all over again. When Ava finished, Sophie blew across the lid of her coffee and said, "I still do not trust him." Ava gave a tired half-smile. "That makes 2 of us sometimes." "No." Sophie looked at her more carefully. "You trust him exactly enough to be hurt by him. That is different." Ava looked away toward the quad where students crossed in winter coats, talking too loudly. Living ordinary lives, she could almost still imagine herself inside. He listened. Sophie was quiet for a beat. "Then make sure he keeps listening." It was the kind of thing only Sophie could say without making it sound like permission. That evening, Roman sent no car. No instructions, no assumption. At 7, Ava buzzed his private line from the lobby downstairs and rode the elevator up on her own. He opened the door in shirt sleeves and looked faintly surprised to see her there. The surprise pleased her more than it should have. "You did not tell me you were coming." That was the point. Something warm moved briefly through his eyes. He stepped aside. This time, when Ava entered the penthouse, it did not feel like crossing into a world that might consume her. It felt like stepping into a room where the rules were still being rewritten and she was finally holding the pen, too. Roman had set the dining table for 2. Simple. No staff, no elaborate staging. Just food kept warm in the kitchen, wine breathing on the counter, candles left unlit because the city itself already gave them enough light. "You cooked," she said. Roman looked almost offended. "I am capable of repeating breakfast-level competence." Ava laughed, then the sound small but real in the wide room. Dinner unfolded with an ease they had never quite managed before. Not because everything difficult had vanished. It had not. The difficult things sat with them at the table like unwelcome but necessary witnesses, but neither of them tried to dress those things in softer clothes. Roman asked about the department chair and listened carefully when Ava told him the assistantship had not vanished after all, only changed hands. He did not mention Mercer beyond one brief tightening of his jaw. He only asked when the summer work would begin and whether the new supervisor would be someone she respected. Ava in turn asked about his day. He told her more than he once would have. A property acquisition, a board vote, a dinner he would avoid next week because the men attending were tedious and dishonest in equal measure. The details themselves mattered less than the fact that he was speaking as if she had a place in his mind beyond his fear of losing her. Later, after dishes had been abandoned in the sink and the city had gone fully dark beyond the windows, they stood together in the living room. No music, no wine in hand. Just the quiet hum of the building and the river below. Roman had changed into a gray robe. Ava wore one of his soft shirts again, this one falling almost to her knees. She stood by the glass, one hand resting lightly against the cool pane. "You are thinking," Roman said from behind her. "When am I not?" He came to stand beside her. The city glittered below like an answered dare. Ava turned toward him. "I meant what I said this morning." Roman's eyes held hers. "So did I." She searched his face for any trace of retreat and found none. "I cannot become smaller to make this easier." "You will not. And I cannot promise I will always understand you." Roman's gaze dipped briefly to her mouth, then back to her eyes. "I do not always understand myself." The honesty of it made something in her soften all over again. Then Roman did something she had not anticipated. He stepped back. Not far. Just enough to break the spell of nearness that usually pulled them into each other before either of them had finished speaking. His hand disappeared into the pocket of the robe. When it came back out, he was holding a small black velvet box. Ava went completely still. Roman looked at the box once before lifting his gaze to her face. "I knew too early," he said quietly. That was part of the problem. Her throat tightened. He crossed the room slowly, as if each step mattered enough to measure. "There is no logic to what happened when I saw you that night. I have had women in my life before. I have wanted things before. None of that prepared me for you." His voice lowered. "Maybe because you did not arrive polished and perfect. You arrived shattered and furious and still trying to stand. I recognize something in that." Ava's pulse beat hard in the silence. Roman stopped in front of her and with an almost unbearable calm went down on one knee. Not theatrically. Not with the easy confidence of a man who assumed the world would give him another yes because it usually did. He looked like a man doing something that cost him. The box opened in his hand. Inside, against black velvet, a diamond caught the city light and held it. Ava drew in a sharp breath. "Roman." He did not look at the ring. He looked only at her. "I am not asking you to belong to me," he said. "I asked for the wrong thing every time I thought that was love." His hand tightened slightly around the box. "I am asking whether one day I might belong beside you." Tears rose fast and hot. Roman continued in the same quiet voice. "If you say no, I will still protect the life you are trying to build by staying far enough away not to damage it. If you say yes, I will spend the rest of mine learning how to stand next to what I love without closing my hand around it." The room blurred for a second. Ava had imagined proposals in the abstract the way girls sometimes do not because they expect them, but because stories teach them to. None of those old imagined scenes looked anything like this. Nothing about Roman on one knee in the glow of Chicago felt soft or conventional. It felt earned by pain-argument desire and the kind of love that had finally been forced into plain language. She stepped closer and lowered herself down in front of him until they were eye level. Then she reached out and closed the ring box gently with her hand still resting over his. Roman's expression did not shudder exactly, but something in him braced for impact. Ava cupped his face with both hands. Yes, she whispered first because she would not punish him with uncertainty when the truth already lived in her chest. Relief moved through him so quickly and so deeply she felt it before she fully saw it. Then she smiled through her tears and said the second truth. "But ask me again in 6 months." Roman stared at her. Ava brushed her thumb lightly over the line of his jaw. "I want to be your lover first, then your partner. Then if we still recognize ourselves and each other clearly enough, your wife." Her voice shook only a little now. "I need time to become more of who I am before I stand beside you as that woman. And I need you to have time to prove that this is not only hunger learning better manners." For one suspended second, he simply looked at her. Then the slowest smile she had ever seen on him touched his mouth. Not triumphant, not relieved in the easy way of men who think they have won. Just moved. 6 months, he said. Ava nodded. Yes. Roman lifted her hand and kissed the inside of her wrist where the bracelet had once rested. Then 6 months. She laughed softly through tears and pressed her forehead to his. Roman rose, drawing her up with him, and the ring box remained closed in his hand, while he held her against him, not tightly, not like possession, but like something far rarer for a man like him. Reverence. Outside Chicago stretched vast and sleepless beneath them. Inside the penthouse felt quieter than it ever had, stripped at last of some old, invisible pressure. The city still belonged to men like Roman in ways that would never be simple. Ava still belonged first to herself in ways she would have to defend again and again. But when he touched the back of her neck and she looked up into his face, she did not see a cage waiting to close. She saw a man who had finally learned that love asked more of him than power ever had. And when she kissed him there in the silver dark above the river, it was not surrender. It was an answer.